2008 protest and self-immolations, and as others have said, that environment issue and ecological degradation inside Tibet is also one of the main reasons for all this social unrest in Tibet. By conclude, I would like to say that China's development policies in Tibet have contributed to degradation of the environment. Tibet's environment condition is degrading and affecting not only Tibet but its neighboring countries. And in 2011, the Chinese Minister of Environment has said that in China, thousands of years of civilization, the conflict between humanity and nature has never been as serious as it is today. Though China acknowledges the environment degradation inside Tibet, however, their efforts in terms of the environment preservation has not spoke about the fundamental reforms, because when all these environment policies are implemented in Tibet, Tibetans, the local Tibetans are not considered and they are alienated in decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next presentation is by Tsewang Mingure, who is going to talk about China's security apparatus in Tibet. We had a macro view in the previous session about the Chinese investment in defense and security. Here is a kind of specific view of what is happening in Tibet. He is again a postgraduate in Chinese language studies and is from the Center for Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies, or JNU, and is doing his MPhil. Please.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished guests, and my dear friend. My topic of the today presentation is security apparatus of China and Tibet, a brief outline. And the security apparatus of China is the apparatus with which China manages both the internal and external security challenges, and it's mainly composed of Ministry of Public Security, Ministry of State Security, People Liberation Army, People Armed Police Force, and the militia. The first two, the Ministry of Public Security and the Ministry of State Security, are the civilian type forces which comes under the chain of command of the State Council, and the first one is mainly primarily responsible for the law enforcement operation and the domestic security related issues, mainly the curbing of criminal activities taking place in and around the societies. The second one is the State Ministry of State Security, which is chiefly responsible for the collecting intelligence information, is the espionage organization of the China, which also comes under the chain of command of the State Council, and it is also assigned with the secondary mission, that is of domestic security. The PLA, which is the main organization which is responsible for the safeguarding the China from the external threat, and it is come under the command control of Central Military Commission of China, and it is also assigned with the domestic security mission. And secondly, the People Armed Police Force, which is the paramilitary of China, is mainly responsible for the stability, maintaining the stability inside the China. And it is also assigned with the secondary mission of external security, and it comes under the CMC and the State Council. And finally, the militia, which is another paramilitary of China, is also comes under the CMC and the State Council, also assigned with the primary mission of external defense and the secondary mission of domestic security. First, coming to the People Liberation Army, which was born out of the Red Army of worker and peasant, was formed in 1st August 1927 during the Nanchang uprising. Is the largest standing army of the world. Currently, it stands at 2.3 million. China, with the changing, China over the time has undergone a sharp military doctrine change from Mao people war to the current local war under the information condition. We see that till the 1979, the military doctrine of the China is purely based on the people war, where the China has given more importance to the sheer number of the population over the weapons, and since 1979 it has changed to the local war under the modern condition, and 1996 local war under the high-tech condition, and since 2002 it's local war under the informationized condition. Along with the changing in the doctrine of military doctrine of the China, it has also changed its military manpower composition in China. For instance, in 1997 to 2000, China has carried a mass reduction in their manpower. Around 5 lakh personnel reduction has been carried out from 1997 to 2000, and among these, 14 division has been transferred to the People Armed Police Force. People Armed Police Force officially was formed in 1983, is the one majorly responsible for the internal security of China. It has undergone 8 major changes since the inception of People Armed Police in 1949, and from between 1949 and 1983, the People Liberation Army, People Armed Force, or the formerly which was known as the Central People Public Security Force, underwent a number of changes both in name as well as in organizational structure, highlighting by a constant change in direct control and command between People Liberation Army and the Ministry of Public Security. The number of changes in the name and control of People Armed Police over the 5 decades can be attributed to the indefinite role assigned to the PAP, their status of neither being military nor being police. The PAP got a major boost in the aftermath of the 1989 incidents. In 1989, there were 2 major incidents took place. One is in Lhasa in Tibet, the another one in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. In both the cases, the PAP utterly failed to carry out their mission. They utterly failed to manage the crowd over the Tiananmen Square as well as in Lhasa, as a result of which the PLA was called in, which conducted a bloody crackdown over the people. In Tibet itself, there were reported that 400 to 450 people were killed during the crackdown. The People Armed Police ever since received a significant increase in resources, personnel and specialized training in order to avoid another repetition of the Tiananmen Square. Militia begins to organize in communist-based area in the late 1920s on the historical tradition by the Chinese Communist Party. The original communist militia consists of number of different parts: Red Guard, insurrection detachments, self-defense armies, young pioneers and small devils. They have extensively contributed during the War of Resistance against Japanese and in the Korean War. The last official estimate of its strength given in September 1951, which put it around 12,800,000 men. In 1953, Pang Da-hui, then the Ministry of National Defense, has criticized and called the militia a heap of flesh and called for massive reduction of militia by 10 to 30%. The subsequent year, and particularly from 1954 to 1957, there was almost no information about the militia. In 1958, when the Great Leap Forward was launched, along with its everyone a soldier movement was launched, which objective was to turn the 220 millions of men and women of predominantly agricultural population into the ocean of soldier. The militia over that time went into obscurity in the last 25 years. Coming to the Tibet and War of Liberation, People Liberation Army the People Liberation Army military campaign in Tibet, which was took place in late 1940s and 1950s, was the first use of forces by the communist China beyond its frontier. In Tibet, the subjugation of Tibet into China mainland carried out in two-way strategy. On the one hand, they negotiated with the Tibetan official in a peaceful manner. On the other hand, they have launched a military campaign inside Tibet. The liberation of Tibet, however, met with massive resistance by local people, and the spark of the popular revolt against the reform, which we are noticeable in 1956, itself exploded in the Great Rebellion in early 1915. The Dalai Lama subsequently made his passage to the India and sought asylum in India, which the government of India willingly provided. In 1989, Tibet riot took place, in which 400 to 450 Tibetan people were killed. In 2008 revolts, there has been reported that 18 civilians were killed, but as far as the Tibetan exile authorities claim, the Chinese officials shouldn't kill 80 Tibetan. In the 2008 Tibet riot, the people armed police force were again, they failed to manage the crowds, and as a result they have also called in PLA to manage the crowd. In my final essays, I will conclude by after the glaring case of tragedy of 1989, one in Lhasa, another in the Tiananmen Square, the PAP received a significant increase in resources, personnel and specialized training. The situation inside Tibet continued to be grim. The alarming incident of self-immolation, now numbering 120, including 22 in 2030 alone, reflect to some extent the China's success in curtailing mass protests, reducing Tibet's struggle to the individual level. The continued involvement of the PLA in internal security indicates that the military, not the paramilitary, continue to be the final line of defense even in the internal security. The 2013 white paper released under the diversified employment of China armed force is suggestive from the name itself that the China is no longer remain dodged in ruling national minority region with use of force, but would explore other area of extending China legitimacy through the economic, philosophically, culturally and psychologically, etc. This is the script from the diversified employment of China armed force released in the 2030, which mainly suggests that apart from their mission of internal and external security mission, they also get involved in the key infrastructure project, in social welfare issues and the poverty elevation initiative, etc. So with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, Tsewang. Now we go to Dolma Tsering, who is again MPhil student in Chinese Studies at Center for East Asian Studies of JNU. She has a BA in Political Science from Madras Christian College and MA in International Studies from Stella Maris College, Chennai. She has worked as research intern at the National Maritime Foundation and is currently an intern at the East Asia Center in IDSA.
Thank you, sir. My topic is economic development of Tibet under CCP leadership. Like historical issue and human rights violations in Tibet, economic development of Tibet has been another area of contestations between China and Tibet. The official descriptions of economic development in Tibet says, today on the roof of the world, home applicants such as TV set, telephone, refrigerator are commonplace as they are in the developed eastern part of China. Since 1959, the average annual growth rates of Tibet GDP has reached 12.9%, higher than the national average. In past, the most of Tibetan farmers and herdsmen wore one woolen robe all year round, having no other clothes to change into. But today, young Tibetans not only have enough clothes to wear, they also want to follow the latest fashion, even in farming and pastoral area. They did not have any choice for food and had to rely on beef and mutton and farmer live on a simple diet of potatoes and radish. But nowadays, more and more Tibetans can afford to buy seafood from the inland provinces. So this is the official descriptions of economic development in Tibet. However, the patterns and the natures of economic development that have occurred within the 6 decades of Chinese leadership has been criticized by various scholars as uneven development and economic growth with social exclusions. If you look at the various policies implemented during this 6th decade of CCP leadership, begins with democratic reform period. When PLA first entered into Tibet in October 1950, Mao's top 2 priority was securing the border and territory of Tibet, and also to transform the Tibet into socialist state. Unlike other minority areas in China, given the fact of Tibet's de facto independence and isolations, Mao on the one occasion told his general that they had to be patient and go slow in Tibet. He further noted that in Xinjiang there are 2 lakh to 3 lakh Chinese, but in Tibet there was not even a single Chinese there. And also to show the promises of autonomy under 17-point agreements 1951, and also to earn the loyalties of Tibetans, especially elite, democratic reform was delayed in Tibet. However, 1959 uprising provoked the urgency in the implementations of the policy, and on March 1959, democratic reform was implemented in Tibet. Under the democratic reform policies, property of aristocrat was confiscated and distributed to the peasant, but was collectivized 6 years later. In 1962, Tibetan was flocked into mutual aid team and followed by commune system in 1965. With the implementations of commune system, private property ownership was abolished. The commune systems is also accompanied by crop diversifications and hog raising. Under the crop diversification, wheat cultivations and vegetable cultivation was encouraged. However, the wheat cultivations was irritant for the for the local Tibetan people. More importantly, the focus is also given to the constructions of road and highway in Tibet. Soon after the PLA entered Eastern Tibet, they begin building road and highway. The constructions of roads building continue in the Tibet for more than 2 decades, and suddenly the most spectacular aspects of overall development in Tibet from 1950 to 1976. And the constructions of roads is driven by the strategic and military oriented. Hence, the modes of economic development or economic assistance that China claims to have rendered Tibet has actually gone into building strategic roads. Mao period is followed by the reforms and open up. The decades of 1980s began by official dismantling Mao radical economic and political strategies. The reform begins with the collectivizations, which was most dramatic measures in Tibet. It has restored Tibetan property and social freedom, and tax was remitted, but only for the few years. And it has returned the animal to the private ownership, and also farmers were free to return for the barley cultivation, and hog raising was also prohibited. In addition, government has also increased the subsidies rate for overall development of Tibet. The above positive trends in Tibet economic was resulted from Hu Yaopang moderates economic policy, but unfortunately these positive trends of economic development in Tibet was short-lived. On the other hand, the government followed the policy of encouraging Han migrations in Tibet. In 1983, government lifted the restrictions where for the Han migration by Han migrations. In 1989, government has also exempted Tibet from general rule that one must be permanent residents of particular area in order to open business. Because of which, in 1983, 50,000 Chinese migrated to Tibet, followed by 1984, 60,000 Chinese migrated to Tibet. The problem with Han migration in Tibet is that it's resulted in the disempowerment of Tibet. For instance, 16 labor unit of Lhasa municipality replaced 30,000 Tibetan employees with Chinese migrants. In Lhasa, out of 12,000 shops and restaurants, only 300 were owned by Tibetan. Most of Han Chinese were located at the politically and strategically important area like Lhasa and Chamdo, where local economic is dominated by Han. Because of which reform and the open up policies were treated as a policy of assimilation of Tibetan into Han Chinese than the economic development. The Tibetan frustration over such patterns of development resulted in 1987 mass protests. Apart from the reform and open up policy, tourism was realized as another important source of income from Tibet. The second Tibet Walk Forum approved 43 projects to develop infrastructure development for the tourism in Tibet. And the next stage, the third stage of economic development in Tibet, it begins with 2000 to 2012. Because of the late 1987 protests and the protests in various other areas in Western region, the CCP or the government, Chinese government, understand that the protest was mainly because of the lack of the development. So the principle of policies such as development and stability was the major focus of the 10 5-year plan. Under this, Western development campaign was one of the major focus, and the four main ambitious plans under the Western development campaign include Qinghai to Tibet Railway, South to North Water Diversion Project, and East-West Natural Gas Pipelines, West to East Power Transmission Plan. First two are directly linked to the Tibet. Lobsang has already talked about the Qinghai to Tibet Railway project. I'll just mention about the few objectives of the railway line, which includes anti-secession, economic development, resources exploitation, facilitating culture interflow, strengthening ethnic solidarity, and facilitating tourism in Tibet. Professor Danubu argued that the purpose of Western Development Campaign is to seek the political solution to Tibet question under the guise of economic strategy in the age of globalization. In 2005, under the 11th 5-year plan, the major focus on the economic development of Tibet has been focused on social development. This is in fact the first time since CCP leaderships in China talked about the social development. Social development, the major focus of social development is improve the livelihood and incomes of Tibetan. The two major, under the project People First program, the various policy has been implemented. However, the two major policy has been comfortable housing project and raising per capita income. Well, also the comfortable housing project is already discussed. So raising per capita income, which is mainly done through the business, opening up of business of fattening sheep and chicken, which also goes against the cultures of Tibetan. Lastly, like this is the relocations of Tibetans. 2009 and 2012. The challenges of economic development of Tibet is, firstly, it's explained as a disproportionate development. If you look at the structures of Thar economic from 1995 to 2007, in 1995, the agriculture sector constituted the dominant and largest sectors of the economic, followed by the tertiary. Also, the agriculture sector is the one where the more than 80% Tibetans derive their income from this sector. However, even in the current situation, the government document indicate that more than 60% of Tibetans still dependent on agriculture for their income. However, the agriculture sector continued to decline sharply, and the tertiary sector continue to grow. And in the current states of economic, Thar economic, tertiary sector is the leading sector in the economic. The tertiary sector is where the least number of Tibetans, where there is the least number of Tibetan and is dominated by the Han Chinese, and it's also indicate that Tibetan play least role in the development of its own economic. And next issue is subsidy. Since the beginning of communist leadership in Tibet, subsidy has been key components of economic development strategy in Tibet. Subsidies are made to cover the deficit of economic development. Subsidies are made either through direct budgetary or made through subsidized investment. From 2001 to 8, state subsidies comes around 154 billion yuan, constituting 93.7% of Tibet financial revenue. Subsidies, the number of subsidies also indicate the numbers of economic deficit. The issue with subsidies, the Andrew Martin Fisher, he focused that the problem with subsidies is that instead of most of subsidies are provided for the sector where least number of Tibetans are located, and most of government subsidies are accumulated in the state-owned enterprises where 70% of employees are Han Chinese. And the large scales of direct subsidies, possibly all of the large construction projects and even small one, are contracted to the out-of-province companies, and most of them are SOE. So instead of protecting and promotions of locally oriented forms of ownership, subsidies intensification simply reinforce externalized patterns of ownership, which in turn provide institutional foundation for the accelerations of externalized wealth flow, thereby short-circuiting local process of accumulations and reinforcing subsidies dependence. If you look at the current status, in conclusion, Tibet ranked least developed regions in China. Human Development Index, Tibet ranked 31st among 31 provinces. In terms of education, Tibet ranked 31st among 31 provinces in China. Also in terms of social equity, Tibet ranked 31st, and social security, Tibet ranked 31st. The GDP of Tibet ranks 8th among the 31 provinces in China, which mainly because of the subsidies. And my conclusion is that the kinds of policies which has been implemented since 1950 for the economic development of Tibet has been strategically and politically oriented rather than for the economic developments of Tibetans and for Tibet. Thank you.
I think it was one of the most depressing presentations for us, because there has been so much of talk of progress and modernization, taking Tibet beyond the shadows of pre-modern times, and here we are. On all indicators, Tibet is at the bottom, the 31st province. With the last presentation in the next 15 minutes will be about Tibet factor in China's foreign policy by Tenzin Ladun. She is an MPhil student in Chinese studies at JNU with a BA in journalism from Madras Christian College and MA in international studies from Stella Maris College, Chennai. And she has worked as an intern in the Department of Information and International Relations of Dharamshala, and also in Times of India. It's a very diverse background. Thank you. Good.
Thank you, sir. I'll be talking on the Tibet factor in China's foreign policy. I'll present some of the main findings of my study from the recorded history of Sino-Tibetan relations from the 16th century to the mid-20th century, highlighting the turning points and the different stages in the evolution of the relations. The Chinese civilization has been famously known to be originated from the Yellow River Valley. Thus, the earliest signs of Han culture could be seen in the regions where there is intensive agriculture-based irrigation. From the Yellow River Valley, the early Han Chinese went on to explore more favorable land in the Yangtze River Valley. The spread of agriculture technique predominantly from the north to south and the east to west happened along with the migration and number of conquest. Places where favorable conditions for irrigation do not exist, like the Mongolian steppes and the Tibetan wasteland, neither migration nor conquest took place. Any group in the Chinese hinterland not familiar with the Yellow River technique became the barbarians. The barbarians, or the non-Hans, the Mongols particularly, and the Tibetans, differed from the Han Chinese on the lines of agriculture technique and the economic development. Some defining characteristics and peculiar institutions found from the Yellow River and the Yangtze Valley is the Confucian civilization. The widespread of Chinese intensive agriculture technique to the mainland China and then to the northeast of China and finally to the Indochina. Indochina comes with a dominant feature of Confucian Taoist culture. The Han rulers emphasized on the Han rulers emphasized on the Ho-Chin, or which is famously known as the harmonious kinship aspect of the Confucian philosophy when dealing with the non-Han and the non-Confucius state. The philosophy of Ho-Chin called for the matrimonial alliance through which a hostile power is transformed into a brotherly state. The first time the Ho-Chin Treaty has ever signed was in 198 BC between Han China and Xiongnu, the Hun's ruler. Such matrimonial practices continued to be a significant feature in the successive Chinese foreign policy in dealing with the foreign country, Waiguo, the non-Confucian people, which is seen in the 8th century Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo's marriage to the Tang princess, which should be seen as a matrimonial between the relations between China and Tibet, which were invariably called as one between the uncle and the nephew relation, Shu and Ti. This episode demonstrates how matrimonial alliances were intricately connected with the strategic problems of war and peace. This very practice of escorting Han princes to the foreign king was done to save themselves from losing their face and dignity, for which they sent princesses as a gift, which must be in turn reciprocated. The return gifts were perceived and recorded by Han chronicles as tribute. China tried to maintain this tribute relation with her neighboring Han people and non-Confucius states like Tibet, but this relation was not based on shared culture, like the Confucius state in Indochina and the Korea and the Japanese area. As can be seen clearly during the Ming Dynasty, who intended to keep a strong and secure border in its frontier intact by maintaining peace and cordial relation with its neighbor Tibet. As characteristically Confucian dynasty, the Ming emperor's relation with the outstanding lamas of Tibet could be seen as a reflection of continuation of Confucius' political ideals, which consist of recognition of merit and rule by virtue, not by force alone. The Ming showed little interest in Tibet, except for securing its borders to the west of China. The Chinese tribute relation extended to Tibet from a special kind of relations constituting a Confucian China-Buddhist Tibet relation, unlike the relations between the Chinese emperor and its tributary states like the Korea, the Vietnamese, and the Burmese. The Mongol imperial rule transformed the Confucian tribute relations into a multinational empire. And for the first time, the Mongol emperors included the freshly conquered Chinese, non-Chinese states and the non-Confucius peoples, like the Tibetans. In fact, the Mongol emperor of the Yuan dynasty was successful to bring non-Han people and non-Confucius states of Central Asia who had resisted China's penetration for centuries. it is quite ironic that the Mongols and the Manchu emperor, who shared more similarities with the people from Central Asia rather than the East Asia, were the ones who are responsible for making the non-Confucius people and the non-Han people as a part of Chinese empire. And today it is the Mongol and the Manchu political legacy that forms the basis for the Chinese Communist and the KMT, the nationalist party, to claim over Tibet, also in the Mongolia and Xinjiang. Okay, the relationship between the Manchu emperor and the Gelugpa Lama was so profound during the 16th century that the ruler of Manchu empire converted to Tibetan Buddhism and built many temples as well. The fifth Dalai Lama visit to Beijing in 1653 has more political reasons. By inviting the fifth Dalai Lama to China, the Manchu emperor hoped to persuade him to use his religious influence with the Mongols to deter them from invading Chinese territories, since the Gushri Khan of the Mongol was still powerful with its army troops and its influence over the Qing Empire. The historical structure of the religio-political mechanisms by which pre-modern China directly or indirectly exercised varying degrees and types of political influence over the traditional Tibet through rituals and ceremonies in their bilateral relations has fundamentally changed the 19th and 20th centuries in the 20th centuries due to the emergence of modern political ideas in Chinese nationalism and nation state with the Chinese nationalist, the Kuomintang party, and later the communists sought to integrate Tibet based on the unitary concept of Han-dominated state. And this is the picture of the fifth Dalai Lama, Lobsang Yangtso. To add something interesting, the Qing emperor Qianlong, who ruled between 1736 to 95, identified himself as the ruler of 5 peoples: the Manchus, the Mongols, the Uyghurs, and the Chinese. Under his reign, the Qing tried to preserve the cultural boundaries separating these 5 peoples while attempting to sinicize the ethnic minorities living in the south and southwest China, which is majorly lived by the Han people. The languages of the 5 people were officially enshrined as the languages of the empire, and the emperor commissioned even the translations and the dictionary compilations and other projects to promote each language. The emperor considered himself as the crucial link uniting between these 5 minorities. But after the fall of Qing dynasty in 1911 revolution, the nationalist leader Sun Yat-sen disregarded the idea of giving any recognition to the non-Chinese and instead called for a Chinese nation comprising of Han Chinese majority people of the population, and omitted the issue of 5 people, which was recognized by the earlier Qing dynasty ruler. Today, the provisional law of the people's provisional law of 1912 specifically that time identified that Mongolia, Tibet, and Qinghai as an integral part of the nation, even though these territories are historically and recently additions to the empire which was created by the Manchus. After the Qing dynasty collapsed, the Dalai Lama called for the head of the Dalai Lama called for the de facto of Tibet, and even during the 13th Dalai Lama, he drove away most of the troops, Chinese officials who were stationed in Tibet, and declared for the independence of Tibet. But from the point until 1950, Tibet enjoyed this de facto state. Since 1949, China's policy toward ethnic minorities has been veered between minority representation within the framework of unitary state and focusing on the ultimate assimilation, as Dolma talked about. Today, the One China policy dominates China's relation with its counterpart. The One China policy, which was previously applied to Taiwan issue, has now included Tibet when dealing with other countries, especially with India, America, and Europe, where Tibetan diaspora actively campaigned for free Tibet. The Hindu newspaper, this one. There is a Chinese need to seek assurance for the foreign governments on this rooted decade-old sensitives on Taiwan, though the term also refers to Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Macau. Lan Chengshu, a scholar at the China Institute of International Studies, who's a former Chinese embassy official in New Delhi, also told The Hindu how one China policy determines a relationship between China and its counterparts. And unlike Hong Kong and Macau, Taiwan and Tibet now poses a multifaceted problem to the communists. Neither Hong Kong nor Macau has ever challenged Beijing's sovereign right like Tibet did, nor claimed to be the legitimate government of China as Taiwan does, nor expressed any aspiration for national independence as the Taiwanese and the Tibetans do. China's relation with any of its counterpart stresses the significance of one China policy, or saying that Tibet is an alienable part of China. Well, I'll quickly go through the core countries which is directly or indirectly affected by the Tibet issue. The first, Tibet-Mongol relation. The Tibet-Mongol relation goes back to the 13th century when Mongol first invaded Tibet. The Genghis Khan, who planned to invade Tibet in 1206. Tibet was made to pay tax until the death of Genghis Khan, when Tibet was again faced with another attack from the Mongol general Durda Tarkan in 1240, when Tibet refused to pay taxes to the Mongol ruler, which was in fact the first military conflict between these two nations. There's also the emergence of patron-priest relation between the Sakya Lamas, who was the ruling Lama in Tibet, and the Mongol rulers. According to the tradition, the Sakya Lama gave religious instruction to the prince of Mongol, who in turn invested Sakya Lama, Sakya Pandita, who is the chief representative of the Sakya sect, in Tibet, with the temporal authority over Tibet in the name of Mongols. Gushri Khan also offered Dalai Lama with the mental tensum, which is a symbolic offering that declared the conferment of Dalai Lama being the supreme authority over Tibet. And there, for the first time, the Dalai Lama became the temporal and the spiritual leader of Tibet. The strategic interest of Tibet to the Mongols became more and more important, with the Mongols indulging in the Tibetan affairs, and economic interest was reduced to a mere importance. Today, the Tibet-Mongol relation has moved from a political oriented to a cultural relation. Very briefly, Tibet-British relation starts with a great Western colonial powers on the Asian political scene, which has changed the whole relationship between Imperial China as a protector and Tibet being willingly dependent on the military protection of Imperial China if necessary. The British Empire in India from 1757 and economic penetration into China by Western imperial powers from 1839 has fundamentally altered the traditional balance of power on the Asian continent. The British at that time was eager to secure its frontiers of India, and more importantly, they are concerned with the prospect of Russia extending its influence over Tibet. It was the interest of Britain to keep Tibet under Manchu influence. In 1846, the first Anglo-Chinese diplomatic discussion concerning Tibet took place, and from early on, the British rulers realized the importance of Tibet as a buffer between India and any external power on the north. But to support or even encourage a complete independence of Tibet was to damage a much larger commercial interest in China, and hence they sought to limit this Chinese power in Tibet and encourage Tibetan autonomy. The British were successful in maintaining Tibet as a buffer zone between China until the PRC took over. To quote Lord Curzon, who is the architect and advocate of the British forward policy towards Central Asia, who wrote in 1901, quote unquote, "It would be madness for us to cross the Himalaya and occupy Tibet, but it is important that no one else should seize it, and it should be turned into a sort of buffer between the Indian and the Russian empires. If Russia were to come down to the big mountains, she would at once begin intriguing with Nepal, and we should have a second Afghanistan on the north. I have not put this very clearly. What I mean is that Tibet itself, and not Nepal, must be the buffer state that we must endeavor to create." The Tibet factor in India-China. So much has been talked and debated and discussed on the India-China relation, but it is important to study the Tibet factor, Tibet as a key factor in determining factor, especially in resolving the border issues between India and China. As famously said, Tibet is inherently linked to Indo-China border since from 1950, when China invaded Tibet, after which India and China came to share the now disputed border. Tibet who used to be the buffer zone between India and China for thousands of years, but in recent years, China's military build-up and infrastructure development in Tibet, the so-called the Western Development Program, has put much anxiety in the Indian people. The Brahmaputra, the diversion of the Brahmaputra river, which originates in Tibet and now flows into India, have raised India's anxiety as well. And there is also increasing insecurity on PRC side with the Tibetan issue, which is explicitly linked to the huge Tibetan diaspora in India and Nepal, where China shares a great length of borders. The presence of the Dalai Lama itself in India is a huge insecurity to the Chinese. And to quote from one of the famous, renowned China strategists, Gordon Chang, who once said, Dalai Lama's presence in India is equal to 100 division. Okay. Moving on to the Tibet-US relation. The Tibet-US relation, if we see Tibet-US relation, one of the major involvement that US into Tibet question can be traced back to the CIA covert operations in the communist countries. The CIA who made their base camp near Tibet and executed that operations with the help of Compass, who were trained by the CIA to counter the communist China. The Tibet issue during the Cold War has been in the overall Asia strategy to contain the communist expansion from China. And Tibet not only proved instrumental to America during the Cold War alone, Tibet issue was also used in pursuing India to come out from the NAM policy, NAM policy, non-alignment movement in countering communism in Asia. In fact, Eisenhower administration used Tibet in UN to back Taiwan's seat for Kuomintang Party, who was an old US ally, and to keep PRC out of the United Nations. The subordination and exploitation of Tibet issue to larger American concerns in Asia was started from the Roosevelt and continued by the Truman and the Eisenhower administration. But not long after, the Clinton administration started taking a different means of approach to Tibet issue by appointing the first special coordinator for Tibet, Gregory B. Craig, who looked into the human rights issue of Tibet also. The present special coordinator for Tibet in US is Ms. Maria Otero, who presently serves as the US government special coordinator, who tries to promote and facilitate Sino-Tibetan dialogue. In America today, there exist two distinct opinions on Tibet issue, coming one from the American public showing their support and solidarity for the Tibet and condemns human rights violations in Tibet and sympathizes with the cause. But there is the opinion from the state who sometimes prefers to downplay the Tibet issue in order to please the Chinese counterpart. And the Tibet-EU relation would be very brief. The question of Tibet factor in China's relation with EU has been one of the upcoming and heatedly debated issues since from the proclamation of Strasbourg proposal by the 14th Dalai Lama in 1988. The year also has a significance for the watershed moment in Chinese history, where the late president of People's Republic of China, Deng Xiaoping, reformed China's market economy. Since then, China's relations have been growing up with other nations, especially with the US and EU. And today, EU and China are the largest trading partner with total number of $567.2 billion US dollar of trade exchange between them. Amidst all these emerging relations between China and EU, it also brings us closer to the constant yet highly essential issues like the human rights issues in Tibet. China and EU have much different approach towards the world and interpreting and enforcing their decisions. According to Zhu, who's the author and the director of the Center of Strategic Studies, China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, once said that unfortunately, in less than a decade, the so-called the Tibet issue, an internal affair of China, has developed into one of the biggest issues causing friction and serious tensions between China and EU. Today, when China EU shares the most valuable market and the biggest trade partner, EU persists on encouraging China to be more active and constructive partner in Human Rights Council, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This will be the second last. The Dalai Lama factor in China's foreign policy. Over the past 20 decades, China has strongly criticized and condemns its trading partners from meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and continues to do so. The Dalai Lama's international influence becomes a major concern to China's foreign policy today. According to Chinese leader, His Holiness' efforts to establish Central Tibetan administration in India are an act of separatist, illegal and illogical institution. Along with all this development, His Holiness in 1980 visits various countries across the world for religious purpose and also seeks international support for Tibet's cause. The Chinese Daily also report that Dalai Lama's retirement in 2011 will have little effect on China's Tibet policy, and moreover, the Chinese leader has defined his retirement as deceptive. The decision to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Dalai Lama almost internationalized the Tibet issue overnight. The Dalai Lama continues to marvel the world with his humanistic approach to the problems around the world and won numerous honorary degrees and awards. China has become kind of accustomed to paying the price for safeguarding its core interests, and now it would let Western countries make the choice. Pay the price for meeting Dalai Lama or avoid showing off their nobility for freedom. The Dalai Lama factor in much of the country has been interpreted differently, where some considered him as an asset to use a Tibet card against China's aggression. Others considered him as a liability, endangering the cordial relationship between China and its counterpart. While China continues to demonize the Dalai Lama and accusing him of being a splitist, the spiritual leader of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, jokingly once said, there's a mantra between both the countries, the Dalai Lama and the Chinese side. The Chinese side will always say, Tibet is a part of China, Tibet is a part of China, and the Dalai Lama has a mantra that I'm not a splitist, I'm not a splitist. So both will be hold on to the same mantra. And finally, the last topic I'll be talking about is the United Nations and the Tibet issue. China had always been questioned on its physical takeover of the Tibetan plateau. There are few nations who supported who raised the issue of Tibet in the United Nations, like the El Salvador, Philippines, and the Malay. But the absence of the representation from the Tibetan side led to the matter being treated as an internal affair of China. The single communist nation which voiced criticism against China was the Yugoslavia, who termed it as a Chinese misapplication of Marxist nationalist policy and the need for People's Republic to respect Tibetan culture and tradition. However, on the 5th of June, the International Commission of Jurists published an interim report on the question of Tibet and the rule of law. Its findings concluded that there was a case of Chinese trying to destroy the national, ethnical, racial, religious group of Tibetans by killing members of group and causing seriously bodily harms to members of the group. Moreover, they termed it as a crimes under the Genocide Convention of the United Nations of 1948. Of the question of Tibet's legal status, the Commission came to the conclusion that Tibet was an independent country and what happened in Tibet did not fall under the internal affairs of China. This report was completely, of course, pro-Tibet and accepted by the Tibetans account without any question. However, much of it was criticized by the communist bloc as being a matter of publicity and also propaganda used by the Western countries against the communist China. And during this period, the People's Republic of China was not a part of United Nations, and the representative of Chinese people was the Kuomintang Party, today it was Taiwan, who also recognized Tibet as an internal affairs of China. The UN General Assembly adopted 3 resolutions on Tibet, 1959, 61, and 65, on the question of self-determination and human rights violation in Tibet. In the later periods, with China assuming a significant role in the global arena, their diplomatic pundits started enforcing on the idea of one China on the nations who are diplomatically linked with the Chinese. With the growing prominence of China and China's clout in the world affairs, especially in economic terms, the issue of Tibetan sovereignty has disappeared. But still the Tibet question does linger, remaining a pest for the Chinese, which has stolen the sheen of China Rising. The Dalai Lama has been termed as the splittist, and much of his activities as well as tours abroad are viewed with much suspicion, and also numerous meetings that are conducted between the Dalai Lama and numerous world leaders are condemned by the People's Republic of China. There's also the Tibetan activists around the world who have been voicing actively for the human rights protection in Tibet. The Tibetans and the supporters in Geneva have been actively lobbying in the UN Human Rights Council session to put pressure on the UN member to raise Tibet issue and to draw their attention to what is happening inside Tibet. In the bottom line is, to this day, the United Nations unfinished consideration of the question of Tibet remains one of the global body's most notable and long-standing acts of omission. Thank you very much.
You must have noticed that this was the longest presentation, probably took double the time than the others, but it was the most important connecting point for all of us. Though she was very careful in not disturbing our peace of mind by ignoring the Indian position, how it has been going up and down the road since 1947. Now we have a little time left because 4:45 was supposed to be the time to start the wrapping up, but to be fair, with all these very bright and useful presentations and very promising young minds, let's give them their due and give them at least one question each. Short question and equally clear answers. The last one will be the first for you to remember anything for asking them. And this was a presentation about China, Tibet factor in foreign policy of China. So let's have any question for Ms. Tenjin Ladun, the last presentation. Maybe I can give her one, and so that we save the time. Why did you skip Indian story? There was no slide for us. India has no policy about Tibet, or as you know, as a Tibetan expert, what do you say about Indian position?
I think it's very clear. The government position is Tibet is a part of China, and well, because of that, Tibet is not seen as a core interest in the India's policy towards Tibet, in dealing with China, of course.
Thank you. How about a question on China's security apparatus in economic development of Tibet under CCP leadership, which was very ably presented by Ms. Dolma Tsering. Any question on that? No? We're all very tired, or maybe I can again ask her to help us in understanding. Was it a continuous status of Tibet as the last province in the hierarchy of progress on all the 4 indicators, or there were ups and downs, say during Cultural Revolution, or when Deng Xiaoping came, or when railway was introduced? Was there any time when Tibet was really looking up like the area of progress?
I haven't looked at like how GDP goes since 1950, but like the data that I've given is the current stage. Tibet is the least developed regions in the world, and also Yeah, there were some progress during the Huyaopang period. There were some kind of relaxation. But if you look at the policies, all the policies, it's driven by, like what I said, strategically and politically oriented than the economic. Thank you.
We have then this question about China's security apparatus in Tibet, which has been most horrifying for all of us, and which has been really coming into, with its absolute failure, with all these self-immolations, and again failure of their control mechanism. So what are the questions for this presentation by Tsewang on China's security apparatus in Tibet? So you may have a question for, no? जी आप सबसे ज़्यादा जानते हैं इसके बारे में. Use your mic, please. Your mic.
Dolma Tsering, while discussing the railway project, she used the term Qinghai Tibet Railway. And my humble suggestion is that perhaps you need to change this into Lhasa Kormo, otherwise I'm talking as a Tibetan and not as a scholar or a dispassionate observer. So as a Tibetan, otherwise you would be sort of accepting the Chinese division of Tibet into so many provinces and prefectures.
Thank you. So we are still waiting for a question on China's security apparatus. You said that now they have a, you are doing that? You said that now they are thinking of regulating Tibetan area, not so much through coercive apparatus, but through social development and political engagement. You think that's really now changing the situation? Because these are the 2 years when we got too many reports about self-immolation.
Well, China is attempting to shift from the military-oriented control of the China, and they are more focusing on culturally, politically, and economically to have more control over the Tibet. But as I see the increase in the self-immolation, I find it mainly because of the heavy development of the armed forces and the sophisticated surveillance and other CCTV installation, that it reduces the possibility of the Tibetan people to carry out the mass mobilization. So it is reflected in that sense only. So they are still heavily relied on the military expert, as well as they are also shifting to the other scope and other areas where they maximize their legitimacy over the Tibet issues.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Because she was speaking about environmental degradation and the reduction in the way in which people were responding to it also, which somewhere links down to the institutional part which Jigme was speaking about on hegemony, and he was using the Gramscian framework to put that. So the question would go like this. So first to Jigme, how far has Chinese or way in which you have interpreted that of hegemony as a way of reducing or putting down the protests in Tibet happening in an institutionalized form, and how far do you think have they succeeded in implementing that hegemony over Tibet? That would be your question. And the question to Lobsang would be that if they have done so much on the institutional framework, the environmental degradations are happening at one side, at the same time the protests have reduced to individual level. Self-immolations are individual level plus, not mass-based ones as of now. So how far do you think is this environmental views taken into the protests which are going to happen or which might take place in the future, kind of thing?
Since there has been like almost 121 self-immolations, and yes, it has been an individual level of self-immolation. but why do Tibetans self-immolate? So, and what are their demands? So, maybe you see self-immolation only as a political act, political resistance against the Chinese, but all these Chinese policies in terms of religion, in terms of political, in terms of environmental issues, all these have Tibetans have grievances on all these issues. So when we talk about self-immolation, we cannot just pinpoint only one reason, one cause as a for the self-immolation. And when we look at the self-immolators, they are nomads who have self-immolated, there are farmers who have self-immolated. So like because self-immolation started from 2009, and why 2009, not before 2009? And as we were talking about Western Development Program in 2001, so like China has at the one time China has introduced various huge huge development policies, and all these development policies have environmental impact, and because of all this political control, environment, and then violation of religious rights, I feel that all these have led to the self-immolation. And with that environment issue only, like when I talk about environment issue and people protest, there are some protesters within Tibet which are only related to the environment, especially the mining, gold mines in Tibet. Suppose in 2009 in June, Gyama mine, which is in Tibet Autonomous Region, people have protested against the Chinese government for the mining activity. 2010 Kanze in Phayu County, people have protested, and 2011 in Chamdo people have protested, and then in 2012 in Shikatse people have protested against the mining companies for gold mining in Tibet, and also recently 2013 in Zadue County in Chingan provinces. So I feel that environment issues are also that China should China should also think over that. And when we look at the self-immolation, we have to look at all these different issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question? One question has already come to Mr. Jigme Yeshi Lama. Any other question for him? He had made a presentation on China's political power, policies, and protests in Tibet. You can take that question, yeah? Thank you.
With regard to the presence of hegemony, especially Chinese hegemony in Tibet, what we see is, in my conclusion, I had mentioned that there is, to a certain extent, what is seen in Tibet is a lack of hegemonic consensus. But what we also see, on the other hand, is a fuzzy phenomena in the Tibetan areas which is governed by the Chinese, where there are the presence of numerous institutions, organizations like the CPPCC, as well as there are other important institutions such as the Buddhist associations, where a large number of ethnic Tibetan personalities, especially the reincarnates, former aristocrats and all, they to a certain extent have been incorporated. This incorporation itself is seen as a mode of garnering a kind of a hegemonic consensus by China through these institutions. But also the problem is there is this complete difference between two cultures, and hegemony comes about if, say for example, the subaltern groups starts accepting the culture of the dominating class over here, dominating class or group or power, which in the case over here are the Chinese. But this to a certain extent is not happening. But also on the other hand, we see numerous instances where there are cases where numerous reincarnates, lamas, even I think so the late Akong Tuku, who passed away recently, was very close to the Chinese. Them, in one sense, taking advantage of the present public spaces which are present in Tibet, in China, to carry out certain activities which to a certain extent can be seen as being positive for the Tibetans. So that hegemonic consensus is to a certain extent present, but not completely, because there is a lack, as there are numerous modes of tensions which arises, and therefore the other coercive apparatuses of the state comes up. Thank you.
Friends, you'll agree that it was a very promising session for all of us. They took a large historical span for us to become aware of various trajectories. They also gave us some very ugly truths to confront. For example, we saw that United Nations emerges as the weakest organization in the world. Even the Chinese establishment is probably doing better than United Nations, which has slept over the issue since last resolution of 1965. And the zigzag lines taken by China again shows that there is a lot to be analyzed, and there are very many finer details which have to be taken into account, whether it is the economic policies or environmental policies, or the emerging global consensus around certain human values, or just pure nationalism and national interest. Nothing is working for China in case of Tibet. It's a losing proposition, and the only missing link for China to wake up is the global solidarity for Tibetan cause, the global pressure for Tibetan cause. European Union is making good money out of Tibetan tragedy. America is keeping studied distance from the Tibetan issue, and India is getting indulgent on very immoral basis, as we were with Myanmar. I think that this was a very important session. I feel very alert now with all these 5 very important presentations. I thank you for your cooperation in giving us very precise presentation, non-passionate. There was no anger, there was no venom, there was no demonization. Pure, simple truth was being used by all 5 of you. I wish you luck with your dissertations, and I thank the organizers to have the wisdom to invite younger minds to engage with such eminent scholars who were there in previous panels. I feel very honored to be invited to preside this session. Thank you very much. Now we take over to the next one.
Now, as organizer, I can just please be seated. I'll just close up within the 2 minutes because since last, I think more than 10 to 8 hours we were here to listening very not lengthy but brief and short, I think, speeches from the various intellectuals, eminence among the Indian highly dignitaries. I would like to thank you all our eminent intellectuals who had been here from morning to till present their views and thought on the various subject which we had requested to them, especially respected Tibetan Sambla and D.S. Rajanji. They came from the out of Delhi. Rajanji has came from Chennai, and Sambla this morning he arrived from Dhamsala, and without any taking a rest, I think you have been here. It is our pleasure to thank all the eminence who be present here through with our invitation by the organizer, and I would like to thanks to all the really our younger really generation who are upcoming, who are doing a good research and PhD as the views of the His Holiness the Dalai Lama Ji, and then the views of our senior citizens. It is because of the visions of the Tibetan community. Now we need more scholars who can to come up in front of the international scenario. Wherever we need the Tibetan issues will come up, we have to request the non-Tibetans, and sometimes we feel we the organizers be uneasy because sometimes we have to find a where we can get a good Tibetan speakers who can speak in front of the international on the issues of the Tibet. So I think really thank you very much all of the last present. This is the special, I think, session for the Tibetan young researchers. I would like to thank you very much, especially who are in GNU, the Professor Shri Kontapalli ji and Dr. Anand Kumar ji, Dr. Soren Singh ji, Dr. Yeshi Chodron ji, Dr. Renuka Singh ji. She came in morning and then she left because she have their own institutions programmed, Tushya Mahayana Center. Especially when I was meeting with Dr. Kontapalli ji last 3 months back, regarding this seminar, one-day seminar. And then I met with the Mrs. Sondhi ji, because we had been last 6 years organizing a jointly programmed panel discussion, seminar, roundtable discussion, and last year we did a roundtable discussion in August, and then this year we, after the almost discuss on the seminar, 3 months we have gone through how to organize, who will be here to invite, and then most of the, I think whatever today's the intellectuals and the programs has been initiated by the Mrs. Sondhi ji, completely by the initiated by the Sondhi ji. TPPRC is just only the behind, just meeting with the Mrs. Sondhi ji, Dr. Gondapalli ji, Dr. Anand Kumar ji, and just to email with our friends and just coordinate, prepare some document, and the background of the books was prepared by the Mrs. Sondhi ji last 2 days back, and I think it's a great job. Now it's my last thanks to the IIC, the India International Center, is a very, I think, always, whenever we have any program, TPPRC since 1992, and then till today we have lots of programs in here in this area to organize many programs. Mr. Stopden was spoken several times in our program. Of course, Dr. Tirkaji and Vinod Sagalji. So we have almost here more than 200 Indian intellectuals and dignities, meaningly. So we have numbers of to choose in particular subject and particular topic. So I would like to thank you, especially on behalf of the Tibetan community, as a TPPRC, Mrs. Sondhi ji. Last 6 years, they have given a really different topics and different programs which is able to organize by the TPPRC. And I also thanks to the Fatigue Norman Foundation, who is always backbone of the Tibetan Parliamentary Policy Research Center. We do organize a numbers of roundtable discussion, seminar, and not only the TPPRC job is just organizing here. We have a numbers of programs with the Tibetan, among the Tibetan community, to workshop, to training the Tibetan young leaders, college students, the school students, and then the elected Tibetan leaders, parliamentarians. And we do also invite our Indian dignitaries in Dharamsala to give lectures to the Central Tibetan administration staffs, parliamentarians, to honor in the Tibetan Parliament in exile our Indian dignitaries who may come over there. So these are the programs of the Tibetan Parliamentary Policy Research Center. Yesterday there was a same topic in seminar was in the Yamuna Vihar. We were with there. It was in Hindi, and almost 3 years, 3 months, I think they have also prepared this program, and then it was in 3 hours programmed. So finally, on behalf of the TPPRC, once again, I would like to thank all our Tibetan who have given support to us to present this, to successful of this workshop, seminar, and then particularly we have given this seminar, so it is like a workshop also. So, and the last, once again, I would like to thank IIC, Mrs. Sondhi ji, and then all the speakers and all the present over here. Thank you so much.